3 weeks until the spring unpredictability barrier ends. I am Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Stormsurf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 11th.
Stormsurf, waves, weather, buoys, altimetry, snow, temperatures, El Nino, weather analysis, essential data for outdoor people, all the time, no hype.
If you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. If you have a comment or question, write it down below. We'd be happy to respond. And if you'd like to make a small contribution to the cause, you may. Hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $sign in it. With that, I'd like to thank the folks that donated last week. Tim Caston, Pierre Morton, Peter Carpenter, Our Predicament, Elliot Harris, Clay Goose, E. Slate, and, of course, Evolution Moto. Thank you all. Most of these folks are longtime contributors. I do really appreciate your generous contributions. With that, let's get to work. We'll start by looking at significant wave heights from around the planet. Starting in the North Pacific, really nothing going on there. Over to the North Atlantic, nothing going on there either. It is that time of the year. Everything is in the southern hemi now. In the South Pacific, we have a series of gales, 1, 2, 3, but really no significant swell production relative to our forecast area up here in California, Hawaii. But for South America, certainly, with 24-foot seas setting up right in this area, that should make some fun-sized surf pushing up along the coast there. But otherwise, pretty quiet for the moment. For the South Atlantic, there's a gale with 28, 29-foot seas right there, 29.9-foot seas, the highest seas over the entire frame image or domain, depending on how you want to label that. And that is possibly making some swell for South Africa, but it kind of looks like a lot of that might be pushing southeast. But we'll get into those details in a minute. I'm going to go over to the Indian Ocean, another gale with 24-foot seas setting up, in the central South Indian Ocean, another small gale south of Australia, but nothing with even 30-foot seas or higher in the southern oceans for the moment. But first, let's go take a look at current conditions. We're going to start up in Oregon, North Oregon, on the Oregon-Washington border. We're going to look at the buoys. Grays Harbor Buoy, Washington, buoy number 036. We're looking at all the energy that's hitting that buoy. If there were 33.3 second period energy, that'd be quite impressive, but there is 0.0 feet of energy in that frequency. And as you go down the whole way, this chart goes down to 5 second period surf. That'd be like pure wind chop, almost not surfable. All we see here is a little bump in the 8.3 to 9.1 second range at 1.5 feet for either one. So primary swell, it's sort of a summation of everything that's in this general vicinity of the bump. 2.8 feet at 8.2 seconds from 260 degrees. Theoretically, that would get you surf at 2.3 feet, literally a measured 2.3 feet at some, random beach break sort of location. There's some secondary swell in there, theoretically at 0.7 feet at 13.4 seconds from 239 degrees. That's southern hemiswell. That'd be maybe not even a foot. Let's see. Oh, yeah, there you go. You can see it, 0.3 of a feet. Yeah, so I guess that's about right. Okay, so not a whole lot going on up there. Then we go down to Northern California, really the San Francisco Bay Area. This is from the Point Reyes buoy, buoy 029 off of Point Reyes, just north of the Golden Gate there. Now we see southern hemiswell at about 16.7 seconds, somewhere in there, and a bunch of wind swell. Not a lot, but, a couple of frequency bands worth in the mix there. So primary swell, 1.7 feet at 16.1 seconds from 179 degrees. That's pretty south, but again, don't really trust the buoys. They give you, plus or minus 10 or 15 degrees of kind of a general idea, but if there's wind swell in the mix, all kinds of funky things happen. Anyway, surf height, 2.7 feet. And then secondary swell, 2.5 feet at 9.4 seconds from 306 degrees. So the northwest wind swell. And that too at about 2.5 feet. Then we go down to Southern California, the Point Loma South Buoy 191 there off of San Diego. Same sort of profile, but much more energy in the 15-second period range and much less wind swell in the mix. Primary swell 2.7 feet at 15 seconds from 187 degrees. Theoretically, that would get you surf at 4 feet, and that seems like a pretty good, generic estimate of what the surf actually is. And then secondary swell 1.5 feet at 11.3 seconds, again from 229 degrees. So some leftover southern hemiswell basically at 1.5 foot. And then one last stop over south shore of the Hawaiian Islands. We're choosing the Lanai buoy over the Barbers Point buoy just because this is much more protected from wind swell. If there were any real, or is any real ground swell, this buoy should tease it out. Buoy number 239. There you go. You see southern hemiswell, maybe a couple of overlapping swells really in the mix here, but the peak at around 14.3 seconds. Primary swell 2.6 feet at 14.5 seconds from 194 degrees. That would make surf at about 3.8 feet. And there definitely are some waves on exposed south-facing shores. And then some secondary swell, 1.7 feet at 6.4 seconds from 161 degrees. Maybe some trade wind swell of some sort. Oh, and surf height 1.1 feet. Some trade wind swell trying to wrap in to some exposed south-facing shores. So let's go take a look and see what has been going on for the past week. And yeah, we'll still go through the northern hemi locations, but by next week, might just be dropping that altogether. All right, so we're going back to Sunday, May 4th. That's when 18Z Sunday. That's when the last run in last week's video. We're just rolling through this. There was a little gale that developed. There's Kamchatka right there with 25.6 foot seas. This is on Thursday, the 8th of May. And then it held at about 25 feet and pretty much faded out from there. Maybe some tiny little swell for the Hawaiian Islands to result sometime early in the work week, but nothing really of any significance and nothing expected for the U.S. West Coast. We'll just roll this out. Let's see, Sunday, 12Z, that's where we are. It's the latest run of the model, and nothing after that. So that pretty much puts a fork in the North Pacific, and it is done for the season. The South Pacific has been on a tear the past 2 weeks, I guess, something like that. Now, not a lot of energy aimed north, certainly not at Hawaii. I mean, it's been little pieces of energy there. California doing better, consistent rideable surf, but I think most of these storms have been pushing from west to east, really focusing on South America up into Central America. Also notice what we thought was an anomaly with the model turns out to be real. It is ice fragments that break off. The good news is, so this was like 2 weeks ago, it was looking pretty nasty, and I go, oh, that's not good. Any storm that comes down there just can't get traction with all that ice there. But that is rapidly dissipating, if not completely gone, and not really an issue. But now we're back a week ago, 18Z on Sunday. Little gale developed off of New Zealand with 25-foot seas aimed off to the north. They kind of grouped and got 32-foot seas aimed well northeast. Swell from this is what's hitting the Hawaiian Islands, that bump of swell that you saw in the buoys. And that eventually would work its way into California. But I think because it was so north angled and Hawaii's like at 157, 158. So that was aimed primarily at the Hawaiian Islands, not so much over at California, and certainly not so much for Central America. And then that one faded out. We're into like late Tuesday, Wednesday. Another system pushed under New Zealand, and Wednesday, May 7th. Oh, did you see that? Let's catch this. The ice anomaly, what was left of it, on Wednesday, boom, it was just gone. The model says no longer a factor. I mean, there is a little bit of still shadowing hanging in that area, but it's gone. So that is good news. Now we need storms. We have, 25-foot seas or 26-foot seas. So this is on Wednesday. For relative to Tahiti, that's important, but to really get up into Hawaii, U.S. West Coast, pretty much need 30-foot seas or better. Now we got seas regrouped here on the far south edge of the Southern California swell window, San Diego at about 117 west. So maybe 26, 27-foot seas. Yeah, maybe some 14, 15 second period swell will result from that, but probably not a whole lot. Then here was our last little thing on Saturday, barely 30-foot seas. That is a very long travel distance up into, not so much for Hawaii, but for California. Doubtful any real meaningful swell will result. And there we are, current time. Then over to the North Atlantic, we'll run through this real quick. We're just looking for anything of, 18-foot seas. There you kind of got a little blob of that. Was 18 feet there, so that was on early Thursday. You can see the swell from it approaching, call it Morocco in that area. But after that, let's see, we'll get ourselves out to Sunday, current time. That's pretty much it. North Atlantic, I think, is done. And then to the South Atlantic, we'll just put this in motion. Yes, there was a little gale here. This was like Monday, the 5th of May with, what do we have? 38-foot seas going to 40 feet. Sideband swell pushing up into South Africa, sort of looking for anything else that developed since then. Little local gale here. This was as of yesterday, the Saturday, the 10th of May, hugging the coast and into Sunday, so probably raw, pretty blown out swell for Jeffreys Bay in that area. And then another gale, 29-foot seas, 29.9 feet to be exact, there in the Southern Ocean, perhaps offering some hope beyond. And then to the Indian Ocean, again, we're back a week ago. Series of gales pushed under South Australia. Swell from that, of course, already hit and gone. Looking for something new in the forecast, and we're not really seeing it. Let's see, that's the current run. Yep. So nothing obvious in the water on its way at the moment. So what does the future hold? We're going to do a deep dive into the South Pacific. We're going to start by looking at Jetstream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales. And when those gales form, the Jetstream helps direct their track. We're looking for a trough, a push in the jet to the north. We kind of see a little bit of a trough there, and that's about it. That northward push helps create a clockwise flow aloft, and that also manifests itself down at the ocean surface. Clockwise flow in the atmosphere in the southern hemisphere is the sign of low pressure. And of course, low pressure, if it's strong enough, generates winds. Those winds get traction on the ocean surface, impart energy to the ocean, and create seas. Those seas, as they migrate away from the fetch area, get decayed. The lesser period elements fade away, exposing longer period theoretically swell. And of course, swell and hit your beach produces surf. But it all starts with a trough in the upper atmosphere. So here we are today, Sunday, the 11th of May, a little bit of a trough here off of Patagonia. Notice winds really weak under New Zealand and almost what you'd call a ridge. It's the opposite of trough when the winds start pushing or the jet starts falling south. All that does is create high pressure at the ocean surface, and that does nothing for producing meaningful long period swell. Put this into motion. We're into Monday. Yes, that trough builds a little bit off of Patagonia, being fed by 150, 160 knot winds, offering hope there. But again, yes, you see a trough there and even here, but the winds are so weak, barely 100 knots. Probably nothing is going to result from that. Now, there is this weird kind of a trough and a ridge in combination with each other. Forecast for Thursday night, the 15th of May, possibly getting some traction there. And you notice the winds ridging south under New Zealand, but then lifting north. You see a defined circulation here in the upper atmosphere. So that's something to keep our eyes on, perhaps offering some hope. But if there was ever a ridge on the leading edge of that trough, that is it, pushing right into Antarctica, shutting down any hope for storm development there. So now we're out to, we'll say, Saturday. The trough continues, pushing off to the east into Sunday, 12Z. That's where we are currently. Maybe feeding yet more development in this area. So we'll have to see. We'll go down to the surface charts and see what's going on there. We'll take this out the next two frames. There you go. Another ridge setting up where all the action was, but it almost looks like a trough here, 180 hours out, maybe going to slide under New Zealand. I never believe a model 180 hours out, neither should you. So let's go down, look at the surface. Surface level pressure, surface level winds. The jet stream, consider that like the foundation. This is where all the action happens. And yes, there is a bit of a trough over here. You see 35 knot winds in a couple of pockets. trying to get organized. I mean, that's good for maybe 13-second period swell, but that would never survive the journey up across north of the equator. And here we are into Monday. Nothing going on there. Some more 30-knot fetch. I mean, they actually look like low-pressure systems. Not so bad. So here we are Wednesday. That almost looks promising right there with 40 to 45-knot winds aimed off to the northeast. So some hope there, but I think the main event is really here on Thursday. Remember that kind of complex-looking trough right there? Here we go. That's 55-knot winds. Now, the real issue is what's going to happen. Is this system just going to go off to the east, or is it going to fall southeast? The more south it falls, the less likely these winds are going to get meaningful traction pushing off to the northeast. You really want a system, whatever the wind speeds are, to be pushing in your direction. For California, that would be off to the north and northeast. This, of course, offers good potential for South America. Go into Friday, you still see 50-knot winds over a good-sized area, really aimed well at South America, but sideband swell potential for sure. We're into Saturday. Another little system, 40-knot winds in southeast of New Zealand, but probably not doing a whole lot. Let's go into, now we know there is some sort of residual trough right in this area. You can see 35-knot winds, but we need more than that. Here, and that was where we're at. We're at 180 hours, something going here. Most of the energy looks like it's aimed south, so pretty complex situation, at least at the surface. Let's go see what effect those winds will have on the ocean surface. That's what matters. So here we go. Significant wave heights for the South Pacific. These are the highest of highest one-third of all waves in the ocean. And that's a pretty good baseline to use for predicting swell and surf. So here we are. Oh, also let's notice the ice line. About 65 south, dropping to maybe 67 or so, something like that. So pretty far to the south, plenty of open ocean here, supportive. If you do get fetch, there's not a bunch of ice in the way to prevent swell production. So we have a little tiny gale here, 26-foot seas. This is not even till Tuesday night, and that's not going to do anything. Another little one here with 27-foot seas. That probably won't do anything either. Then here's the main event here. Also notice under Australia, something going on there, but we're really focusing on the Pacific for the moment. Here we go. As we get into late Thursday night, Friday morning, the 16th of May, 37-foot seas over a small area, building to 40 feet, holding right at 40 feet. And I'm keeping my eye. Now, we'll just run through this, and then it fades into Saturday. Now, let's go back real quick and just look. What I'm looking for is the fetch falling southeast, or is it pretty much holding on about the 48 south? Well, I can look here. 46.85 latitude line. I guess I could watch here while I look at that. 48, 46, 46. No, going pretty much due east. That is a good sign that at least sideband swell could radiate up towards California. Not for Hawaii. Hawaii's back here somewhere, so this is well east there. And certainly for South America and up into Central America and Mexico. Potential. Again, it's still a bit out on the models. Let's give it another day or two. And we're into Sunday, another little system, but just no holes. Oh, there we go. Maybe, but again, right on the edge of the Southern California swell window and a week out. So mainly the big event is that Thursday, Friday storm. For the next week, looking in the North Pacific, we'll just put this in motion. And, I mean, we're looking for anything 20 feet or higher and not even close. It's all just basically wind swell. The North Atlantic will go through the same motions, not expecting to see anything meaningful there. A little bit of a gale here, 20-foot, 22-foot seas, theoretically, on Wednesday evening, targeting Portugal, Morocco, that area, maybe up into France and the UK. Maybe. We'll see what happens. It's pretty late in the season. That winds up and out and is done, and after that, nothing else going on. The South Atlantic, there's our current gale, 29-foot seas, but it sort of falls apart while pushing under South Africa and also taking, again, that dreaded southeasterly track. Still, because South Africa is so close, maybe some sideband swell will radiate up into that area. Now notice, it starts lifting northeast again, so we get Wednesday into Thursday with decent-sized seas, so some hope there. And then we're already into Saturday, and then here's Sunday. So notice, nice little system here right along South America, kind of a backdoor type system. But I don't plan to be surfing there anytime soon. And then finally, the Indian Ocean. All right, next week, there we go. Little system, tiny little system, 34.7-foot seas. But that ought to be enough. You can actually see a swell front right there, regrouping as it pushes under or close to southwest Australia with seas 37 feet, building to 42 feet, something like that, and in close proximity, so for sure swell there. Another system under South Africa on, we'll say Thursday. It fades out before really getting any solid traction, but some remnants hold together, so that would likely be another swell pushing to the northeast. And we're into Saturday and Sunday. No giant, strong systems, but definite surf potential for the Indian Ocean. Local wind swell production potential. All right, surface level pressure, surface level winds, and we're doing this just for like California. So that'd be southern. There's the Baja, the border, Southern California, Central California, that little notch right there, that San Francisco Bay Area, and then Cape Mendocino area. Hawaii out here. High pressure in control, though a local low pressure. Winter is not over just yet. One of our reviewers commented, yeah, it's just been like boiling hot and then freezing cold, on like a 4 or 5 day cycle. One more of those seems to be likely. So here we are Sunday, low pressure building off of Oregon. Look at that. Winds, okay, it is Sunday afternoon. Yeah, northwest, 20 knots for Point Conception, but pretty light in the Bay Area. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Pretty standard sort of thing. Then we get into Monday. The low starts pushing inland. High pressure building. The difference, they call it a pressure gradient. Difference in pressure between the low pressure and the high pressure tightens the isobars, creates a tighter pressure gradient, a bigger difference in pressure between the high and the low. That creates or increases wind speeds. You see northwest winds 20 and 25 knots just off the coast. Monday, not so bad. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. But as we get into Tuesday, the high pressure 1034 millibars starts ridging into the California coast and down into Mexico. 15 to 20 knot winds there. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. Good for this kind of moderate waist-high easterly wind swell sort of thing. Wednesday, the gradient really takes root, 20 knot to almost 25 knots in pockets from Point Conception over all of California. That'll create wind swell. That's also going to drop water temperatures. You just get a bunch of upwelling. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So we get into Thursday, more of the same relative to California and for the Hawaiian Islands. Friday, the gradient still in place. I mean, we're in what they call springtime, not the spring unpredictability barrier, but just springtime. This is a pretty normal sort of pattern. And actually, we got lucky. It hasn't been blowing all that hard, all that long. Sometimes it starts as early as February. That's really when you're in a strong La Nina pattern. If we're in a weak or a Modoki La Nina, this is kind of like, this is what you'd expect as you get into April and even May, and then maybe by late May into early June, this pattern will sort of fade out. But we always have to pay the piper in California with just upwelling and northwest winds. Good for making wind swell, though. So anyway, Friday, 15 knots for Central California, but up to 20-plus knots north of the Golden Gate. Trades, pretty much standard fare for the Hawaiian Islands. Saturday, still same sort of thing, just blowing northwest winds. Trades, good for the Hawaiian Islands, up to 20 knots. That'll make some maybe larger wind swell. Saturday, oh my gosh, here it comes again. Saturday to a week from now, 25 to 30 knot northwest winds, just incessant low pressure up here in the Gulf. Trades 15 knots for the Hawaiian Islands. So just looking at this, it looks like we're in for a week of nuking northwest winds for California, but honestly, it's not any worse than it normally is this time of year. And then precip relative to California, right? Point Conception there, Southern California down there, San Francisco Bay Area there. The blue is rain. We know there's low pressure there. Sure enough, as we get into Sunday night, Cape Mendocino to be experiencing rain by Monday morning, rain down to the Golden Gate, snow in higher elevations, and about, 11 a.m. Monday, rain as far south as the south end of Monterey Bay, maybe down to Big Sur. A little bit of snow maybe for Tahoe. Just go one more frame. Yeah, by Monday night, you can see whatever is there quickly fading out. Maybe some lingering rain and clouds over the Sierra. So we get into Tuesday morning, and that all fades out. You see the extent of isobars with this big high-pressure system. That sets up, and then we are in full, I'll call it not summertime, springtime mode for the coast of California. And but my guess is that's probably it for the precipitation, but who knows? Nature might prove me wrong. The snow forecast dashboard for Palisades, Tahoe, formerly Squaw Valley, what's that, about 2 inches? And again, that's on, well, today's the 11th, so Monday morning, and then that's it. This is total accumulation. Let's go check out 1 or 2 other resorts. Same deal for Kirkwood, maybe 1 or 2 inches. And Mammoth maybe getting in the action, but not till the morning of the 13th. The freeze level for Palisades, Tahoe, again, this is the base of Palisades, Tahoe, this black line, that's at about 6,200 feet. This is the summit up at the top of the Palisades or Granite Chief at about 89 to 9,000 feet. Red, if there was precipitation, it would all be liquid precipitation. Gray would be sleet, that range from like 32 to 35 degrees. And right here at the interface of the gray and the white, that is the 32-degree freeze line. So you see freezing temperatures down to the base. This is down at 52 to 5,300 feet, and where the yellow squigglies are, that's where there's potential for precip. So certainly cold enough to even get flurries, perhaps down in the parking lot at Palisades, Tahoe. Then after that, a steadily building temperature profile with the freeze level above the summit by, the night of the 14th. And then heading up from there into the 12,000 to 12,500 foot range. So a warming pattern expected beyond. A quick look at the surf forecast for a couple locations. We'll go up there to the Columbia River there off of the border between Oregon and Washington. Wind swell in the maybe 6-foot range on Tuesday, dropping down, hanging in the 4 to 5 foot range into Friday, then slowly trickling down from there. But it all pretty much looks like onshore winds, 10 knots for Tuesday, Wednesday, into Thursday. Winds go south for a little bit and then back to onshore. Swell sizes, 5 feet at 10 seconds sort of thing. 3 feet at 11 seconds. Yeah, from that little low off the coast, maybe it gets build a little bit of wind off the coast. 5 feet at 11 seconds. You get the general idea. Going down to Northern California, San Francisco, Ocean Beach sort of thing. Wind swell at 7 feet sort of thing in there, but there's also southern hemi swell in the mix. It looks like 2 feet sort of thing. We'll get into the details here in a second. So it's a battle between southern hemi swell and wind swell, but you just look along the coast, northwest winds, 17 knots, 27 knots, 22 knots, 25 knots, just like we saw in the other charts, 34 knots into next Sunday. So certainly not a beautiful sort of surfing situation. Yeah, 7 feet at 10 seconds, 7 feet at 9 seconds, and then the southern hemi swell, 1.3 feet at 13 seconds, 1.5 feet at 15, 1.3 at 14. Then another little pulse in there Friday, Saturday, 1.2, 1.4 feet at 16 to 17 seconds. So again, still steady southern hemi swell, nothing big, but a whole bunch of wind swell. Going down to San Diego, more protected, less wind swell, a little bit more southern hemi swell, surf heights, 2 feet, 2.5 feet. maybe up to 2.8 feet sort of thing as we get into Saturday and Sunday of next week. Notice the wind speeds, onshore a bit there on Monday, Tuesday, 15 knots. But after that, not nearly as bad. Swell size is 1.3 feet at 13 seconds on Monday. Then a new little swell comes in, 1.4 feet at 16 seconds. But then wind swell also in the mix, so it's this battle. 1.1 at 13 seconds. Here we go, 1.3 feet at 17 seconds, almost 2 feet at 15 seconds Saturday. So again, battle between the wind swell and the southern hemi swell. South shore of Oahu, surf heights in the 2-foot range, getting even smaller as we get later into the week. Trades 15 knots. Maybe in the 20-knot range initially, and then backing off a little bit. Swell size is 2 feet at 13 seconds on Monday from swell that's currently hitting. And then let's see if we can see anything else. 1.5 feet at 11 seconds, and really nothing meaningful after that. And then over to Bali, which always seems to pick up any swell there is, just generic for that whole region. Surf heights, 3 feet into Monday, maybe 4 feet. That's probably wind swell Wednesday, Thursday. And then it looks like maybe some more legitimate swell in about the head-high range sort of thing as we get into next weekend. Let's go look at swell heights. Yeah, there's 4 feet at 6 seconds, but 2.9 at 13 seconds. You see, again, the same sort of deal, the battle between the wind swell and the ground swell, till the ground swell pretty much wins out 3.5 feet at 15 seconds, 3.5 feet at 15 seconds on into Saturday and Sunday. So something to ride, nothing epic, but take what you can get. And with that, it's time to look beyond long-term, the long-term outlook. We're going to examine two major weather oscillations, the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, and ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. These two weather oscillations are the primary influencers of our weather long-term. We'll start with the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation. There are two phases to it. There's an active phase and an inactive phase. These weather oscillations rotate around the planet on the equator, one on the far side of the planet, the other on the other side, opposite each other. Then try to get it organized. Here we go. And they rotate around the planet west to east, from west to east. So relative to the Pacific, one phase would push in over there in the far west Pacific, take about 4 to 6 weeks to make it across the Pacific and then push over South America and then into the Atlantic Ocean. After that, the inactive phase would come in behind that. And then, so the active phase of the MJO is like a low pressure system. It takes warm, moist air down at the ocean surface, lifts it aloft. That warm, moist air gets fed into the jet stream, feeds the jet stream, making it stronger, both in the northern hemisphere and in the southern hemisphere, and that helps feed troughs and storm development. The inactive phase of the MJO does the exact opposite. It's a high-pressure system. It makes downward falling air. That steals energy from the jet stream. The jet stream gets weak and splits and kind of doesn't do a whole lot. So we've had surf in the southern hemisphere, in the Pacific, for pretty much, or storms for the past 2 weeks, maybe even 3. That smells very much like the active phase of the MJO. Now the jet stream is starting to get weird, doing some strange thing. Maybe that's a signal that the inactive phase of the MJO is starting to push into the West Pacific, or maybe not. We'll have to look. Anyway, so we're looking for signs to try to tease out that pattern. So we're going to start looking at the TAO buoy array. This is a series of buoys that are strung across the equator in the Pacific, from Ecuador on this side, the whole way over to, well, this is New Guinea here, so the far west Pacific. Those buoys have wind sensors on them. These arrows are 5-day average winds. Now also note, this whole area, was it last week or the week before, was dead. There was no data in here. It's all back. NOAA is in the process of going out, updating this buoy array, trying to prepare us so we have increased monitoring of any developing El Nino sorts of situations, but we can sort of use it to tease out what's going on with the MJO as well. So you see winds pretty strong out of the east, the trades, right? The inactive phase of the MJO, because it's a high pressure system, that's what feeds trade winds. The active phase of the MJO, because it's a low pressure system, dampens trade winds. So we're looking for relative strength of these trades for this time of year. So this is just the average winds irrespective of what time of year it is. Pretty strong out of the east over the East Pacific, moderately strong over the central, moderately strong over the West Pacific. But the anomalies, the difference from normal for this time of year, suggests trades a little bit stronger than normal here in the far East Pacific, but then you get just a little bit past maybe the Galapagos Island, things really settle down, and if anything, just dead neutral, normal, neither suggesting active or inactive phase of the MJO, and holding that way as far as we can get across the Pacific. It will be really great when and if NOAA can get these buoys up and running out here, so then we'd have complete coverage. They are in the middle of a major upgrade of this entire array, and I think it's a multinational effort, so it's just not America going at it alone, so especially over here in the West. So we'll keep our eye on that, and it would be, you know, it's a multi-year effort, so I'm not holding my breath for anything anytime soon, but it would be great to see this all filled up at some point in time. All right, let's keep digging. We're trying to understand what's going on MJO-wise in the Pacific. The wind forecast for the whole planet for the next 2 weeks. Blue, and this is not actual wind speeds, this is anomalies. Our winds blowing stronger out of the east, so the blues, that'd be easterly anomalies. Stronger out of the east, that'd be stronger than normal trades. The yellows, the exact opposite, weaker than normal trades or westerly anomalies. Here's where we are now. This is the whole planet, so there's the date line. I'm only talking about the Pacific right now. Far West Pacific starts at 135 east, so about right there. So the main area, forecast-wise, is from here to about 170 west. When the active phase of the MJO moves into the West Pacific, that's where it really gets traction, does all its magic, feeds energy into the jet stream, and does things. Once it gets a little bit past the date line, then it's good in winter months for producing precipitation into California. But by the time the energy gets up into the jet stream and gets really pumping, it's almost like impacting the coast. We really want the storms to be off the coast to produce big seas, but not have it turn into a perfect storm mess near shore. All right, so where are we at? Well, we see easterly anomalies in pretty much the eastern half of the Kelvin wave generation area, the West Pacific, from 135 east to about 170 west. And we see westerly anomalies in the western portion. In fact, those westerly anomalies made it even east of the date line. Oh, what was that? Today, yesterday sort of thing. But now you see easterly anomalies at least surging a little bit to about, we'll call it the dividing line, about 150 east, something like that, for a couple of days, at least in May 16th. Then you see westerly anomalies again poking a hole in this. And the assumption is, and if you look at the pattern here, westerly anomalies slowly in fits and spurts making their way further into the Kelvin wave generation area. We are in the spring unpredictability barrier. The models are trying to determine what is going to happen with ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation. That is your El Nino La Nina thing. But all that depends on the MJO, so that's why we're studying. But in the spring unpredictability barrier, the models all have a very hard time figuring out what is to come. That's why in the title, 3 weeks left. We're sort of still in this area where we're not really sure. I mean, honestly, those of you that follow the videos for a fair amount probably have a pretty good idea of what's coming, and I do as well. But we're looking for any signs of, well, is there a tendency towards El Nino or a tendency towards a return of La Nina? Where are we going to go? All right, for right now, pretty much looks like a balance between westerly anomalies and easterly anomalies, with them each taking equal shares. The westerly anomalies do their thing, the easterly anomalies return, but the dividing line between them, if that dividing line can get to 180 or somewhere west of there, that is good news for us, because if the West Pacific is full of westerly anomalies and we get into fall, that bodes very well for a favorable jet stream pattern for storm production. For summer, well, we're in a transition phase. We're coming out of La Nina and we're just trying to get ourselves to neutral. this looks like that. Let's keep digging. Outgoing long wave radiation forecast. Okay, if you have warm moist air and it's being lifted up into the atmosphere, when it hits colder air aloft, it's going to condense and form clouds. And if that pattern is predominant, i.e. being driven by the active phase of the MJO, then you're going to get more cloudiness than normal on some portion of the planet. So that's what this chart does. The blue, cloudier than normal skies, active phase of the MJO. The orange is drier than normal air. That is falling air, high pressure, the inactive phase of the MJO. You can't get clouds if all your air is falling down instead of lifting aloft. And so you get clear blue skies. So this is current situation. South America, Central America, Hawaii, EQ is the equator, New Guinea there, Australia, dateline right there. West Pacific, active phase of the MJO in control per the statistic model and holding for the next 5, 10, 15 days while slowly getting weaker. So according to this, we're still in the active phase of the MJO, and the southern hemisphere from a Jetstream perspective should be getting infused with energy from the MJO. The dynamic model, the GEFS model, a little bit mixed. I mean, you can't go from active to neutral on day 5 and neutral on day 10 and come back. My guess, there's some version of weak active phase of the MJO holding over the West Pacific. Let's go look at the phase diagrams. These are the detail maps of where the active phases for the same two models, statistic model here, dynamic model here. How do you read the chart? Well, the active phase of the MJO moves from west to east, from the Indian Ocean to the maritime continent. That'd be like Bali. Over the West Pacific to the East Pacific, under the United States. Remember, it's on the equator only. Over the Atlantic Ocean to Africa and back and around it goes. The heavy dot is where the active phase is. The further the dot is from this circle, the stronger it is. So a very weak active phase somewhere in the far east maritime continent, about ready to move into the West Pacific. 1, 2, 3 different runs, all have it in some flavor of being over the West Pacific for the next 2 weeks. Every one of these dots is a day. You count them all. There's like 14 or 15 of them in there. So 2 weeks worth. The dynamic model, GEFS model, pretty much showing the active phase hanging here over the East Maritime continent for the next 2 weeks. So 2 models, probably not too far apart from one another. And then another upper level model, effectively outgoing long wave radiation. This goes out 40 days. This is a statistic model. Green areas favorable for precipitation. That'd be your wet air. Dry air is the oranges. South America, Central America, New Guinea there. 0 is the equator. Dateline roughly there. This, I'm not sure whether the model's broken or whether this is really what the situation is. I think it's closer to reality. Some sort of active phase here over the maritime continent today. Forecast slowly, and this goes out 40 days. Each panel is 5 days. Slowly making its way into the Pacific through about the end of May. And then the inactive phase builds after that, pretty much for the whole month of June. So if there was a target for swell production, at least according to this and what we've seen so far in the presentation, seems like May is a pretty good time, at least, for the MJOs to support storm production in the southern hemi. Then we go to yet another model, the CFS model. Again, this is 850 millibar zonal winds, up about 4,700 feet, but still a good proxy for what's going on at the surface. The blues, easterly anomalies, you just think of that as like inactive phase of the MJO. The reds and oranges, westerly anomalies. Here's where we are today. The date line right up the middle of the chart. The West Pacific starting at 135 east right there. This shows you the MJO, the black contour. If it's dotted, that's the inactive phase, and you see the preponderance of easterly anomalies. And here is a very weak, or was a very weak, active phase, and a little bit of westerly anomalies. And so right here we are, neither active nor inactive, westerly anomalies, making it about like what we saw in the other chart. Some sort of easterly anomaly event forecast for the next 1 or 2 weeks, and then the inactive phase of the MJO takes over. Again, westerly anomalies, pretty well almost to, not quite to the date line today, but our forecast retracting according to this model into, almost for the next 3 weeks as the inactive phase takes over, and then westerly anomalies active phase sets up. So pretty much saying the same thing. May is your target for storm production. Let's go look at one more. And this is the CFS model going 3 months. Now they switch it here. Past performance is down here. The forecast, the future is up here. The date line, 180, right up the middle right there. West Pacific starts at 135 east, so right there. What you can see, blues, easterly anomalies have been in control up till about a week ago. And then all of a sudden, boom, westerly anomalies have taken over. Now this is not as detailed as that last model we looked at, but gives you a more broader brush view of what is going on, okay? And you see the preponderance of easterly anomalies since January on the date line, and then pretty much starting at about 5 days ago, westerly anomalies taking over the entire West Pacific from today onward. That is, last week's video was the demise or the end of La Nina, and this pretty much indicates that's exactly what's going on, or at least what the models think is going to happen. Let's overlay the MJO here. Okay, so you see this incredibly weak, there's an active phase. We're maybe in some inactive phase right now, but kind of active. But, very weak MJO pattern, almost no influence from it. But the westerly anomalies are coming nonetheless. That is exactly what we want to see. Now, last week and for months, they've been showing some major active phase up here. Today's run of the model, this thing actually runs every 6 hours. So this version that we're looking at here suggests, well, maybe not as strong as what was forecast, but nonetheless, westerly anomalies in control. Just draw, what's the dividing line there? Yep, pretty much like 175 west, filling the Kelvin wave generation area into August. That's a great setup. Not historically epic, not El Nino, but just a pattern biased in our favor in terms of westerly anomalies, where in the past couple of years, it's not been biased in our favor. We have been lucky in that the MJO has done some strange things and it's provided us surf, but this looks just more like your kind of generic, oh, this looks like a good setup for the fall. Yeah, this is what you want to see. Now, what's driving all that? Let's overlay the low pass filter here. The dotted contour, high pressure bias. The solid contour, low pressure bias. This is your La Nina signal. This is your El Nino signal. 1, 2, 3 contours. The third contour is already gone. The second contour is supposed to be gone as we get into the 4th of June. So let's just say, 3 weeks or so. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, about 3 weeks from now. And then the final contour moves east of the Kelvin wave generation area as we get into the end of June. And then we're off to the races with the low pressure bias, the El Nino signal. I'm not saying El Nino is coming, but an El Nino-like generic pattern moving into the West Pacific. Again, that favor, as the jet stream moves from west to east over this area, it's going to get infused with energy as it makes its way across the Pacific. California is at like 120 west, so right there. So storm production out on the date line, and then some dead air over the Gulf of Alaska, so you get the swell without the weather, and at least from a surf perspective, that would be a good thing. Now, this is just August. Again, I don't believe a model 1 week out, much less 3 months, but this pattern has been holding, and the transition from this La Nina-like pattern to a El Nino-like pattern happened. It was about 3.5 weeks later than what was forecast 2 months ago, but it did happen, and that's a pretty good track record for any model. I'll go with it. All right, now to the ENSO, the El Nino Southern Oscillation portion of this discussion. We're going to start by looking at subsurface temperatures in the ocean on the equator from the East Pacific the whole way over to the West Pacific. Good news is 29-degree isotherm is big and building, almost reaching to the date line, so it's made a little bit of progress to the west. The 28-degree isotherm I think it made it to about 163 at one point this past week and is more or less holding there, suggesting warm water expanding, if not moving to the east a little bit. That means that trades must be dying or weaker than normal in this area. Otherwise, they would keep this warm water sequestered here in the far west Pacific. The 26 or 24 degree isotherm coming in at 25 meters deep here in the far east. That's about where it's been. You know, not great, but not bad. Certainly not La Nina-like. But it's not the actual temperatures that matter. As always, it is the anomalies. Difference from normal for this time of year. And the good news is this line right here, the 0 degree line, suggests it is nothing but warmer water from the West Pacific to the East Pacific. That means that trades are probably blowing about normal, I'll say. And this is kind of what you'd want to see in a generic, normal, ENSO kind of pattern. Not El Nino. El Nino, you'd have a bunch of warm water here. La Nina, all your warm water would be here, and it'd be colder than normal water here. This looks like about as neutral as you can possibly get. That is a good thing. There is another version of this chart, also with the addition of not only using the buoys, it also has satellite data integrated with it, so it gives you a different perspective. This chart, what has changed? Warm water building in coverage, mostly in the west, but down here in the east, making a good incursion to 135 west. I mean, for all winter long, it was held up at 160, if not even further west than that. Almost looks like a Kelvin wave pushing across the Pacific. That would be generated by westerly anomalies in the far west Pacific, taking this warm water, pushing it to the east. Also of note, the volume of cold water here, and this shade of blue is like almost neutral. If they had a neutral color here, you know, like a quarter of a degree either side is 0, my guess is that's what you'd see here. And the little cold, that's the last tiny little cooler pocket. They're just, every time this thing updates, and it's about every 5 days, that's how long it takes for the satellite to make its way around the planet. It's a polar orbit satellite. Every pass, this guy gets smaller, suggesting water temperatures returning to neutral over the equatorial Pacific. That's a good thing. Why? Warmer water supports evaporation. The more evaporation you get, the more energy transfer up into the atmosphere. That also supports hurricane development. So maybe we'll end up with a normal hurricane season as we, in the East Pacific, and probably an enhanced hurricane season in the West Pacific, given the volume of warm water here and theoretically the reduction in trades over that area. Here is the sea height data from the satellite. Okay, South America here, so that'd be Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Galapagos Islands, Central America, the equator right there, dateline right there, New Guinea right there. These are not temperatures. These are the height of the ocean. Strip out the waves, the wind waves, the tides, and is the sphere of the ocean higher or lower than normal? If you have cold water at depth, cold water contracts. When it does that, you'll end up with a little divot on the ocean's surface. If you have warm water at depth, it expands. It'll displace the water above it up. And so you get this bump right. There's my pointer right there, right in there. You also see a little bit of warming out in here. And as you go over the middle here, again, it's that split. Oh, you can't see the scale there. But there is no neutral. It's either yellow or it's blue. But right in here, I'd say this is all dead neutral right here. We still do see these negative anomalies here and here straddling the equator about 5 degrees north and south. Lingering remnants. Well, some of this is, again, you get that high pressure going off of California up here, sweeping northeasterly winds down the coast. So that would definitely make, kind of dig things out a bit in here. And maybe the mirror image is going on over here in the southern hemisphere. But at some point, as we get out of the spring unpredictability barrier and springtime just settles down, I think this will all dissipate and you're going to end up with like dead neutral temperatures over a broader area here. We're still between spring and the remnants of La Nina. Again, La Nina gets into the atmosphere and just doesn't go, boom, I'm done. No, the fundamentals, and that's what we're seeing here, the fundamentals for La Nina are gone or fading, but it'll take 3 months for it to fully wash its way out of the atmosphere, a minimum of 3 months, if not longer. So if we'll say May, June, July, it won't be till August till we'll really see something that looks like ENSO neutral in the atmosphere. Upper ocean heat anomalies, and this is over the past year. West Pacific here, East Pacific here. There's your La Nina, colder than normal water temperatures in the East Pacific and pulses of it. You see Kelvin waves trying to make headway here back in June of last year and August of last year. September, November, but really going nowhere, just getting clobbered. And now, finally, here we are, the end of April. It really looks like a Kelvin wave has pushed across the Pacific, and the cold water pattern in the upper 300 meters of the atmosphere has dissipated completely. This, as of this date right there, whatever that is, I'm just going to eyeball it and say April 12th. That was probably the end of La Nina. And from here, we're in the midst of the 3-month transition to ENSO neutral. Sea surface temperature anomalies. Okay, so this is the standard chart here. You can see, of course, all the oceans, the yellows, warmer than normal temperatures, blues, colder than normal temperatures. But the main El Nino monitoring region from 120 west out to about 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. So you draw a little box right there, and you see warmer, little pockets of cooling. The white is, now this actually has neutral on it, so it's that whitish right there. And if you sort of average temperatures over this entire region right here, I'd say roughly it's about neutral. Now, we have high pressure off the, building in the Gulf of Alaska, pretty standard this time of year. That creates welling, just like what you're seeing here. All that very standard for this time of year. Some of that working its way down into this area, but kind of looks like ENSO neutral. Then there's the alternate version of this chart that tries to just eliminate the warming ocean temperatures because, the oceans have been getting warmer for the past 100 years. So this just basically says, okay, I'm going to average the temperatures of the entire planet's oceans, get a data point, and then region by region determine what's warmer or cooler than whatever the global average is. And this sort of shows you still there's this, and right on the equator is all we're talking about, this cooling signal here. You see a bit of the warming here. This has neutral. I'll slide it over so you can see the scale. The white is considered neutral. So this shows things still being biased a bit towards La Nina. Somewhere between the first chart and this chart is probably reality. But this definitely shows still a bias towards La Nina, at least for the moment. Let's give it 3 months and see where we're at. Sea surface temperature trend for the past 7 days. And again, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. I'm looking right here. Oh, South America right there, the Galapagos there, date line out here. The equator is right there. Warming a little, cooling a little, but the whole way across the Pacific, pretty much it appears to be dead neutral. Weekly sea surface temperature anomalies for the Nino 3.4 region for the past week and corrected to try to take into account the global warming signal. Nino 3.4 right here, minus 1/10 of a degree. Last week we were dead neutral, and you can kind of go back in time and see at the peak of La Nina, December 25th, we were down 1.1 degrees. We're basically dead neutral now. That's all good and fine, but what does the atmosphere think is going on? Now, remember, we're still theoretically in probably atmospherically La Nina because there's momentum from months of a weak La Nina, Madoki La Nina. That's still in the atmosphere. So we look at the difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. Tahiti in the Pacific, Darwin roughly over the maritime continent, Indian Ocean sort of thing. When pressure is lower in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Hey, we are negative, minus 11.85. Where have we been for the past month? Well, we were up at 17, but you see this like almost 18 days or more here of nearly negative readings. At a minimum, that suggests the active phase of the MJO is trying to make its influence over the Western Pacific. 30-day average tries to take some of it actually helps delineate the active-inactive phase of the MJO pattern. So today's value minus 2.39, where were we a month ago? We were up at 10.65. So the swing from at least the inactive phase of MJO to neutral, if not slightly active. 90-day average, this is your El Nino, La Nina indicator. We were barely, 8 is like weak La Nina. Today, we're down at 2.99, so almost neutral, but not quite there. Let's go look at this on a graph. This chart pretty much tells the story pretty well. Bureau of Meteorology Australia says neutral is +7 to -7. I'm more like a +5 to -5. Either way, oh, and the downward swings here, like here and here and here, that's the active phase of the MJO. That is falling pressure. The upward swings, the inactive phase. Here we are, sort of looks like active phase, and all this right in the neutral territory as of right now. I'll take that. Outgoing long wave radiation cloud cover. This is actuals, not a model. This is real satellite data looking at what's going on. Dateline right here. The reds and yellows, clearer than normal skies, high pressure. You see that's been in place since last fall. And then as of about April, it backed off. It's trying to make an incursion here, but you also see wetter than normal skies, trying to make headway about halfway into the West Pacific, into the Kelvin wave generation area. Definitely smelling like the death of La Nina and a return of maybe a neutral pattern. And then finally, the forecast for sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region, the official El Nino monitoring region, and the forecast from the CFS version 2 model. Well, here's where temperatures were in April. That's actuals minus a tenth of a degree. As we get into May, this would be like May 15th, supposedly dead neutral temperatures, maybe rising to 1/10 of a degree above normal in June. And then just, you see for yourself, as dead neutral as you can get the whole way into fall and the beginning of winter of this coming year. So if the models are correct and if all this is right, we're going to actually have a neutral year. And it is indeed a rare thing of late because it seems like we've been on this whipsaw ride of either into El Nino or blazing into just ridiculously strong, high-pressure induced La Nina for years on end. And now finally, and this is coming out of La Nina, not going into more La Nina, not going into El Nino, because we had a big El Nino, was that 2 or 3 years ago, a supposedly big El Nino that didn't really materialize, and that was due to the PDO, and I'm not going down that rabbit hole today. But it seems like for right now, the models, the atmospheric data, the ocean data, and everything suggests we're moving to ENSO neutral. Now, the question with ENSO neutral is how does that do for long term? I mean, it's all about momentum in the atmosphere. And if we're swinging towards an El Nino, then you get a lot of momentum in the atmosphere and you get a lot of storms as we get into fall. But if you just sort of are sliding into this laconic, sort of half asleep atmosphere, a lot of times neutral can maybe not really be great for storm production, or other times it can. I mean, I just don't know. We're going to have to see. That's just sort of a word of caution with ENSO neutral. We're going to have to figure that out. But for the short term right now, it appears the active phase of the MJO is trying to set up to some degree over the Pacific. That's good for storm production in the southern hemisphere, at least for the month of May. So another couple of weeks of that, and then maybe as we get into June, we'll move into the inactive phase for a little bit, but after that, it kind of look, and as we get out of the spring unpredictability barrier, so that would be June 1st. I mean, I'm not like gonna get all excited to come June 1st, but as we get later into the month of June, I think we're gonna have a much better sense of whether we're going into ENSO neutral or whether we're gonna fall back to La Nina or into El Nino. Most models from what we're seeing right now, again, we're in the unpredictability barrier, so the model's accuracy is on the low side. But they're all suggesting ENSO neutral, and that seems like a reasonable guess as to where we're at. If you have some data or some opinions that think otherwise, please let us know. I always enjoy hearing what you all have to say. Okay, but other than that, so right now, maybe a storm come mid to late week, and that would take a week for that swell to reach up into California. Certainly South America would do quite well if the storms develops as forecast, and then up into Mexico in that area, of course. Beyond that, kind of a big unknown. I mean, we're hoping that we get more storms in the pipe and MGO feeds it all, but we'll just have to wait and see. All right, that's our video for this week. If you enjoyed it, please give us a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Click the Stormsurf icon down in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Questions, comments, always welcome. And if you'd like to make a small donation to the cause, you may hit the super thanks button down below, the heart with the $ in it. I always really appreciate the donations that you'll make, and they help keep this channel going. All right, that's it for this week. We'll do it again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks so much for hanging with me for an hour, and we'll do this again. Thanks.